Proverbs chapter 19. And that's where I'm going to begin. And here's what your Bible says. A person's wisdom yields patience. What that means is, as you grow in wisdom, you grow in patience. You don't get impatient, you become more patient. That's one of the marks of wisdom being added to your life. That is connected with the next sentence and thought. And he goes on, the writer says, it is to one's glory or to one's credit to overlook an offense. So he says this, he says, a wise person is going to be patient, and that patience through wisdom is going to allow them to look past what otherwise might have offended an older version of themselves because they're growing. And so the next verse is Jesus speaking, and Jesus says this to his disciples in Luke 17, beginning in verse 1. Things that cause people to stumble or to be offended are bound to come. Can't avoid being offended. Jesus says it's going to happen. But woe to anyone through whom they come. So he says there's people who are going to be offended, and there are those who do the offending. Don't be the one that does the offending, but realize you're going to have a chance for offense. It would be better for them, the offender, to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck. It'd be better for you to come in contact with the Sopranos. You don't know if you're allowed to laugh at that or not. It'd be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble or to offend one of these little ones. So watch yourselves, Jesus says. Goes on and says this, if your brother or sister sins against you, offends you, rebuke them. And if they repent, forgive them. Even if they sin against you 7 times in a day and 7 times come back to you saying, I repent, you must forgive them. The apostles, the disciples, said to the Lord after hearing all this, increase our faith. Jesus starts talking to them about how to handle offense, and the disciples make the connection between needing to navigate difficult people and their faith increasing. So today, we're going to grow in our faith today, and we're going to connect this idea to families, and I'm going to talk to you about the family and offense. The family and offense. Tell your neighbor, say, I'm going to grow today. Go, just turn and tell somebody, I'm going to grow today. That was so sad. This is a chance for all of us to grow in faith today, and I want to connect this in this last session, this last message on family, because family is the first place that you experience being offended. Family is where you learn how to navigate that offense, either positively or negatively. It's where you learn how to handle a very significant thing in your life. And let me define it for you. Being offended is an emotional and subjective, meaning it's different for every person. What offends me might not offend you, and vice versa. It's an emotional and subjective response to a perceived insult or slight. It can arise from words, actions, or even non-actions that someone interprets as disrespectful or demeaning. So there are many factors, 3 main ones that I want to communicate with you briefly about offense. There are external triggers, someone's actions outside. There are internal triggers, things from your past, traumas, families. Then there are interpretations of those actions that come into play. And as I said, we all learn about being offended in our family. I learned growing up in an Italian family on offense. You had to learn to have thick skin in my Italian family, because my Italian family, if they didn't like something about you, they told you straight to your face, no filter. Just told you. And here's what I watched and here's what I observed in my family. That one family member would say something offensive to the other. very strong. And the family member who got offended would talk to everybody but the one who offended them about the problem. And I watched it. My aunts would call each other, and they'd have telephone game, and can you believe they said this? And you wouldn't know that you were offended until 15 different phone calls happened, and someone else informed you that that happened. And by the time that happens, that person that was the offender is now offended because the person they ticked off didn't come and tell them and didn't have the courage. Can you see the does anybody else's family have any of this kind of stuff going on in their lives? I mean, dear Jesus. That's why I want to do this in family. And I want to illustrate this for you, if I can, through something I'm going to call the backpack of offense. Chris, will you help me? Will you help me, please? Come up here and help me, please. This is my backpack, and it's got good use. And I'm going to let Chris borrow it, and he's going to illustrate this for us, if he would, please. And I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and put this backpack on, okay, my man? All right. And then I'm going to ask you to just step right up here and turn and face that direction, okay, just for a minute. So this is Chris. Everybody say hi, Chris. Hi. Hey. And so Chris has got some good stuff in this backpack. He's got some good stuff in this backpack that God gave him. But this is how offense works. Offense is an exchange. It's an exchange for good God stuff in exchange of bad, unhealthy, won't help you stuff. So Chris is walking around with a bunch of good stuff, but then Chris is walking around with joy and satisfaction. You got some joy, do you, Chris? Have you got any joy? Hey, my man. He's got some joy and satisfaction, but something happened. You just keep facing that way. I told you he's got joy. He's got joy and satisfaction, but something happens. And he has an unmet expectation. He'd put his faith in human beings, and he takes on an offense. And he takes the joy and satisfaction, and he lays it down and harnesses to himself this disappointment. He's making exchanges. This is what offense does. He's a good decision maker. He's making sound decisions, but he starts ruminating and contemplating and thinking about the past and past traumas. And so he makes an exchange, a substitute. He takes his sound decision making and he starts beating himself up with past trauma. And adds it in there, and he just starts feeding on past trauma. They didn't treat me right, my family did me wrong, and so on and so forth. He's got inner peace. But he gets offended. He gets offended because he gets a negative comparison. And so he says, comparison is what I'm going to hold instead of inner peace. Comparison, by the way, only leads to one of two things: inferiority or superiority. And neither one is going to serve you well. That's what happens when you compare. You're like, I'm better than them or I'm worse than them. And you lose your peace. You get offended. He's walking around and he's got opportunities. The sky's the limit. The future is bright. But he starts listening to rumors and gossip. And he exchanges those opportunities for that offense of rumor and gossip. What else has he got? He's got spiritual growth on the horizon. He's growing and loving God and making progress, and somebody insults him. And he says, forget about the growth. I'm going to pick up the insult, and I'm going to put it in my backpack. He's making bad exchanges. Don't blame Chris. It's not Chris's fault. You do it too. I do it too. But I need you to see how harmful this is and why you can't be a person that's easily offended. He's got healthy relationships, but all of a sudden he feels rejected by somebody, and so he throws away the healthy relationship and picks up the rejection. We go on and on. He's got physical health, but he trades that for misunderstanding. He's got mental and emotional health, and he exchanges that for insecurities, and he's got differing beliefs and values than other people, and before you know it, he's got so much offense, he can't even get the whole backpack zipped up because it's just bubbling out. How many can see being offended and choosing offense? How many would agree with me? It's a bad exchange. Give Chris a big hand. He helped me with that. Thank you, brother. Thank you, my man. It's a bad exchange. Let me spell this out why you need to not have the, like, you need to set your heart to be a person who is incredibly difficult to offend. That's your choice. Someone says, well, I don't know what they're going to say. Doesn't matter. It's with it. Offense is taken more than it's given. So whatever they say, whatever they do, when you've upstream of their behavior set your mind to, I'm going to be virtually impossible to offend, and you set that as your mind, you disarm the enemy who wants to take from you. And they could hurl insults. They could say mean things. And you say, what do you mean by that? I don't understand. Just play dumb. That is one of the keys to not taking offense. Just assume the best. Figure out how you can twist what they've said or done into a compliment instead of taking it as criticism. Well, isn't that lying to your... No. It's believing the best, which you're supposed to do. Let me say that to you this way. The believer has no defendable excuse or reason for living and staying offended. You can't find a biblical reason to stay offended. There's no place where the master says, oh, in that case, you ought to be upset. Why? Watch what happens when you take offense. When you take offense, there's an obstacle for you in worship and in prayer and in your giving. Jesus said it. He said, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and you're offended by a brother or sister, leave your gift there. Don't even give it. Leave your gift there and go make that thing right. Then, he says, come back and then offer your gift. He says when you're offended, you're not even in position to give your best gift to God because that offense has contaminated your heart and your soul, and it's a barrier for your worship, for your prayer. It's those experiences where you're living with an offense and you're knowing it. That's very important that you don't go searching for something that doesn't exist. If you're offended, you know it. You know it. You know, you may not want to tell it to everybody, but you know it. And you might not be offended today, but you've been offended in the past, and I promise you, you'll be offended in the future, and I can give you that guarantee because Jesus, the head of the church, prophesied it for us. He pointed it out. So it's an obstacle to worship and prayer, and there have been times where I've been trying to connect with God through worship and prayer, and I can't get there. I just can't make the move. I can't make the progress. I'm not getting anywhere. It feels like my worship is barely getting to the ceiling and bouncing back and hitting me. The prayer just goes up and comes right back down. And it's like, God, what are we doing? And over and over and over, the Lord has said, you've got this in your heart. You need to make this right first. That's what he's talking about. When you give your sacrifice, your gift of worship or prayer, do it with a clear heart and a clear conscience. The next thing it's a barrier to experiencing forgiveness. Forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. One passage says this, if you don't forgive others, your Father in heaven won't forgive you. Mark 11:25. It's a barrier to forgiveness. When we live with offense, it's a misalignment with God's nature. What's that mean? Offense is an enemy of love. And in his epistle, John says this, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And when you're living with offense and you are tolerating it and it is acceptable behavior, you're outside of alignment with who God is as a being. His nature is not being expressed through you, and you're unable to receive all that he has for you. This one is awful. When we're offended, our heart is hardened. Hebrews 3:15 says this, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. When your heart is hardened, you're not as sensitive to people and to the Lord as you normally are, because that offense is an enemy, it's a barrier, it's a blockage, it's an issue that needs to be resolved. So, right, how do we do it? Like, what do we do now? If we're offended today, or if we want to be armed for the future, what do we do? What do we do next is a great question, but I'm here to tell you, you're not going to really love the answer. But you never go wrong doing what's right, and God's word is always the central focal point. So from the word, Jesus says this in Matthew 18. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Let me break it down for you as I finish and as I close. How do you walk through when you're offended? What are your steps? Step number 1, speak with the offender privately. Jesus says it. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. And this, if I can tell you this, with confidence over the last 20 years, this is the point where many, many believers get it wrong and they refuse to do this. And if we would do this, you would be shocked at how well things go. Isn't it amazing? It's almost like God knows what he's talking about. But in my family example, that's what a lot of the church does. They talk to everybody but the one who offended them, and that causes problems. And what you actually end up being, you end up being a stumbling block yourself for others when you give your offense to someone else, because now that individual is secondhand offended. They didn't even know that thing happened until you gossiped and told them about it. Now they're carrying a grudge on your behalf, which is causing them to stumble. And here's what happens in those situations. When we don't do it this way, we actually become a tool of the enemy to discourage other believers in their walk. Let me lay it out for you. It might be confusing because Josh and I share the same name, so I'll use Angel as an example instead. Angel's offended me, just not in real life, but in pretend. Angel's offended me, and I'm ticked. She treated me with disrespect. She didn't call me Pastor Josh, she just called me Josh, and I flew off the handle, and now I'm ticked. She's dead to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm over it. She's disrespected me. She's demeaned me. That's my interpretation of it. So I go to Lauren and tell her, believe this? That's so rude. I've earned this title. I mean, it's on my business card. It's on the website. I mean, can't you see I've got a jacket on and I got a whole screen here. I mean, like, what's the deal? She won't call me Pastor John. Then I go to Mrs. Martin. You believe this? You believe she did? Then I go to Daniel. Then I go to Matt. And now what I've done is I've taken my insecurity and I've spread it and passed it 4 people down that didn't need to know it. They didn't need my insecurity passed on to them. What they needed from me is for me to deal with it the way the Word teaches, which is for me to say, hey, Angel, I don't know if you knew this or not. And remember, this is completely pretend, right? When you did this, it hurt my feelings. It offended me. You know what she's going to do? Because I know her. She's going to say, oh my goodness, I had no intention of doing that. I didn't even know I did that. Or she's going to say, yeah, I did it on purpose. I refuse to call you that. Either way, I've shared with her what bothered me. That's my part. How she processes it and responds is her part. Can I tell you something, believer? Stop trying to control other people's behavior and just control your own, and do it by the guidelines of the Word. Speak to the person who's offended you privately, number one. And I'm going to tell you right now, 80% of your offense is going to be over if you do that step. You don't have to go any further. But if you do, then you do. And what you do is you take one or two others, not to gang up on, but to show them that their behavior is affecting multiple people. And because you believe the best of that individual, you want to bring it to their attention because you want them to stop the harm that they're causing through their style, their preference, their mindset, their lack of self-awareness, their whatever. This is spiritual growth. This is how we help one another grow spiritually. And so we don't go and gang up, but we go, write this down if you're taking notes. Prioritize clarification over confrontation. You're not confronting people. You're clarifying. You're trying to have a conversation to help the situation. The next one's intense. I wish it wasn't in here. Tell it to the church. If he refuses to listen to them, you've already gone once, they didn't listen. You took two people with you, didn't listen. Tell it to the church. This needs a little bit of interpretation because each house and each church is different. My belief about this is this does not mean when you've been offended and the first two steps didn't work, we put you on the platform and give you a microphone and you tell everybody how that person was a no good, dirty dog. However, you're thankful you're not in a church like that. You better be, every one of you better be thankful because we've all sinned and come short of God's best. Eventually, given enough time, your name would be called from this platform. But not by me and not here. I don't interpret it that way. Here's how I interpret it. You went privately. That didn't work. You took two, and that didn't work. Third step is you seek counsel from a spiritual leader in your life to help you navigate this difficulty. You've tried it on your own. Now you get someone who's a third party, who doesn't have any emotion attached to it, and loves you, a pastor, a spiritual leader, to say, hey, here's how you should walk through that, and maybe I can help you. And then if that doesn't work, then the next step is you treat them like an outsider. This is tough. I've had many conversations with Jesus about this. Couldn't you just stopped at step 3? Why 4? Why the fourth step? I don't like it. It's not fun. Go to them privately is 1. Bring someone else that's impartial 2. Get spiritual guidance 3. That doesn't work. Treat them as an outsider. Let me ask you a question. Does 4 come before or after 1? It wasn't meant to be a trick question. 4 comes after 1, right? This isn't the first thing that Jesus says either. And I need to mention that it's not a small point, because oftentimes what we'll do is we'll skip the other 3 steps and go straight to this one and just shut them out of our life. And I am not advocating that. That is a rare and difficult move to make. I've only made it a couple times in my life. Can I use a non-churched word just to describe how difficult this 4th step is? Can I? Will you let me? But Jesus said offense would come, so maybe you'll be offended by this. I don't know. It sucks. This step is awful. And I've done it because I was given no other alternative. Because I would not allow my emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being continued to be mishandled by someone else's abusive behavior toward me that I could not control. So I did in my life what I could do to stay healthy, follow the word, and move forward with God with a clear conscience. It's not easy. And I'm going to tell you this because it matters. I've had to do this in some situations with people who are very close to me and my family, and I hate it. I wanted there to be another way. And I say that because I am tired of living under the weight of other people's opinions forcing me into silence over someone that I know that lives nearby thinking I'm a bad guy. But I'll be honest with you, I flat don't care anymore. I'd rather stay in God's good graces and serve you faithfully with the challenges that I've navigated than try to please people who are never going to be happy with any of my decisions, which is why it came down to this in the first place. This is a freedom message. This is a message that will cause you not to be bound, but will cause you to go free. And it's not easy to get to this step. Some of you might be on this step. And my heart goes out to you. And I'm praying for you. And I'm believing with you. But listen, very carefully. If it wasn't step 4, then it's too soon. If you did this to get out of the other tough stuff, you've stepped outside the guidelines and scope of what God gave as directives in our life. And I would encourage you to follow the process. I've done my very best in this entire series to serve you with courage, with boldness, with clarity. And my prayer is that your family's stronger because of this 9-week series than it was before we began it. And I believe that this message in and of itself will have the power to really change things for your spiritual good.
Have you ever felt like God doesn't hear you? That your voice hits the ceiling, like the heavens are closed? I've felt that way too. Hello, my name's Josh Pennington, and I would love to share with you how I navigated the dry seasons of life in my brand new book called When the Heavens Seem Closed. You can get this book anywhere that books are sold, online or at morelifechurch.com. I would love for you to plan a visit to worship with us any Sunday morning at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. at More Life Church.